Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Homeland Security Today's Profiles in Excellence. If you haven't joined us before, Homeland Security Today each year asks our community to nominate exceptional leaders in our community who have done amazing things. And so in 2020, given the fun and amazing year 2020 was, we expanded our awards to include people who did exceptionally well in the COVID response. And so today we're very, very excited to introduce to you Elizabeth Capello. And she absolutely won a mission award for her work helping the nation stay safe during COVID, but staying safe in a little bit of a way that perhaps people don't think about. And that is that she is the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And as all of us were transitioning to everything online, including, classes and courses, everything, Beth was taking almost 250,000 people to telework. So many of us in the public, we don't think about the fact that the Department of Homeland Security has to keep operating to keep the nation safe. But Beth was instrumental in assuring that we didn't skip a beat. So none of you heard anything about all of the trauma that takes telework or any kind of breach or any kind of problem. And that is pretty much due to Beth and her team at DHS being ready and also being there as leaders to take the entire department to telework. So Beth, welcome.
Well, hello, Christina, and thank you so much for your kind words. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
You are always so humble. I mean, they are not kind words. They are facts. They are not opinions. And so, we love here at HS Today to bring people like you to the forefront because there are many stories that are untold. And certainly the transition to telework is an untold, really huge success story for our COVID response as a nation, because we couldn't have DHS go down. You can't have DHS take a break. So I just want to introduce a little bit more about Beth's background because she was acting CIO of DHS in late 2019. So before COVID really hit, she was leading the department and they had been making preparations for telework for quite a while, but had never been really forced to make it work. So she was instrumental in that planning at late 2019 as well as throughout 2020. So she was also acting and deputy CIO for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She was an executive director at the Field Support Directorate at CBP as well, and probably got a little bit of leadership from being a U.S. Marine. Woo! So one of the things I just wanted to start for our listeners is to ask you about, the role of CIO at headquarters at DHS and kind of what it's responsible for, so they have an idea of the breadth of your work.
Well, thanks for that, Christina. And I think I love talking about DHS. We are the third largest federal civilian agency. We have, as you pointed out, almost 250,000 federal employees. And the DHS CIO oversees an IT budget of just north of $7 billion. And so when you talk about the breadth and scope, we also have an incredibly diverse mission set that we support. And when we look at that variety of missions and the different out tempos and the different constructs, I think it makes for a really interesting IT and technology environment. One of the other things that I think is really critical when we talk about the role of the CIO in the context of the COVID response, the DHS OCIO office manages the enterprise wide area network. We also provide a number of enterprise capabilities in terms of sharing information across the department and platforms that also enable sharing even outside to external federal agencies and state and local pieces. And all of those aspects of the role became incredibly important during COVID. I'm sorry, Christina, you went mute on me.
Sorry. And you have a tremendous number of officers that are on the ground. So I don't think people realize how many officers and frontline type officers like Border Patrol agents and ICE agents and others who are literally on the ground. And then you have a tremendous number that are administrative. So it's kind of a real combination, in addition to you saying that you share with state and local and all kinds of other jurisdictions. So that is a tremendous amount to manage. So tell us a little bit about that. How did DHS prepare? And then, the execution, how did you manage all of that? Or what were some of the steps?
So I think it's important to recognize, at DHS, continuity of operations is absolutely in our DNA. I say that quite often because it's a core function of who we are, right? Continuing homeland operations isn't something that we can question. We just simply must do it. So when we talk about things like providing technology capability, we have to provide that technology capability regardless of the circumstances. So whether it's FEMA going out responding to a natural disaster, or as you pointed out, Christina, the U.S. Border Patrol agents out on the front line, the OFO officers, CBP OFO officers clearing cargo coming into the United States to support our economic stability. All of the technology that facilitates those activities has to work. And whether it's a natural disaster like a hurricane that impacts our connectivity, or having to transition to a remote posture like COVID, it doesn't matter. We have to have continuity of operations. And so I think when we look at our ability to transition smoothly, we absolutely plan for this all the time. And we do it in a variety of scenarios. But what's really interesting is I was the beneficiary of sort of a lucky break, if you will. Several years ago, there was a huge snowstorm in the DC metro area. And as telework has evolved over the years, oftentimes when there's an event like this, they say, okay, you have the opportunity to work from home if you're telework ready, or the building's closed, et cetera. So anyway, this big snowstorm hits, and the telework solution at the time couldn't handle the capacity. So oops. And while that was disruptive, a snowstorm is typically, a 1 or 2 day event before folks can get back into the office. And as we've seen with COVID, certainly not a 1 or 2 day event. But that particular snowstorm, what it did was it made us realize we needed to strengthen the infrastructure and strengthen the remote work capability. So this was, I want to say it's probably 3 or 4 years ago now. So at the time that we had to transition to telework for COVID, at least on that instance, our technology capability had already been enhanced, which was a real benefit for me in going from 10,000 on any given day to almost 70,000 overnight without missing a beat. I think the other piece that we had already had some fairly significant transformation efforts underway in terms of our network infrastructure and cloud adoption and activities like that actually ended up being hugely successful in terms of contributing to our COVID transition. So for email, as an example, had we still been in our legacy on-prem email system, I am fairly certain that transition to a remote work posture would not have been nearly as successful, right? We got a bunch of new collaboration tools, a great deal better capacity and performance. So I think in terms of our ability to respond, it was a couple of really key factors. One were the Department of Homeland Security. So continuity of operations is an absolute must. And 2, we had already had some transformation efforts underway that helped to shore up the foundation of our technology environment so that when we had to transition, that transition was far smoother than it would have been. So I think, if your key takeaway in that is, continuous improvement and practicing your continuity of operations on a regular basis.
Practice does make perfect. It's an old saying, but it still works.
Yes, absolutely.
So you had within DHS a number of components that are not separate from headquarters, but they kind of are, and they have their own operations. How did you manage the communications with all the components while everything was rolling out?
So another function of the CIO obviously is to collaborate closely with those component CIOs. And we have a number of mechanisms that we use for that, whether it's a CIO council or a deputy CIO council, or just simply direct communication. And during the initial transition to full-time remote, we were in pretty much constant communication, especially with the larger components, so your CBPs, your ICE, and USCIS, et cetera, to ensure that our capacity for supporting telework would support their mission. Now, as COVID has gone on for the 1,000 years that we've been in this environment, many of the components have begun to develop their own virtual working capacity and improve their own environments. But during those initial couple of months, we really were in constant communication and constantly monitoring the environment, right? Because while we were confident in the technology, we hadn't stress tested to this particular level. So keeping an eye on the network to make sure that our network connections and capacity were working, keeping an eye on those VPN connections and some other technologies like Workplace as a Service to ensure that we weren't overloading the capacity, that was key, right? And talking to the components on a regular basis to make sure that their needs were being met. We had a couple of other interesting sort of things that happened during that maybe we hadn't planned for that required real coordination with the components as well. When I think about the U.S. Coast Guard, right, and having to onboard personnel during COVID, they did not have a mechanism to do that safely. In other words, do it distance, do it remotely. And so we have an information sharing platform that we were able to leverage with the Coast Guard to give them that capability to onboard people remotely. So that was a huge success. It wasn't something we had planned for, but certainly I'll put it in the scenario plan.
We had a little moment where you froze up.
Oh,
Yes, you said you'd put it in the scenario planner. So I waited through and I think the connection's back and good. I guess I have so many follow-ups to that because that requires a tremendous thinking outside of the box as well. You know, when you run into a challenge, I think some people are aware that FEMA is also under the jurisdiction of DHS. And so were there any unique needs for FEMA since they were leading the response to COVID?
You know, one thing I will say about FEMA, in terms of unique requirements from DHS, OCIO headquarters, not as much, because really, again, this is their core mission, right? Responding during crisis events is what they do day in and day out. Again, for all of the components, our responsibility was to make sure that the core infrastructure was functioning as well as possible.
So I know that you probably haven't even had a minute, given you go from COVID to a presidential transition and there's all kinds of moving parts constantly every single day. Thank God you're a Marine, yay. But one of the other questions is, have you had a moment to just kind of think about what the keys were, like the key leadership or communications components that you had in place, or that when you look back, you were like, oh, these things were really key? What would you share with other leaders that are dealing with that kind of transition?
So I hate to repeat myself. However, I've been with DHS since it was created, and I actually came to Legacy U.S. Customs when I left the Marine Corps. And I think one of the things about DHS, by virtue of the very nature of our mission, is it does attract people who are operationally minded. And of course, we have a great deal of veterans, and I want to give a shout out to all my fellow veterans that are part of the DHS family. And I think when I look at the leadership, what does that mean from a leadership perspective? And I think one of the things that was really helpful in responding to this is, although I was new to DHS headquarters, and although I was relatively, we had a relatively new team, actually we still have a relatively new team, we put a lot of effort into developing trust amongst the team. And I think it's absolutely imperative that as a leader, that you have a team you trust and rely on and communicate with, because during these crisis events, I think, certainly you're the leader and you have to be out in front and you have to be making decisions, but you can't do this all by yourself. And I think absolutely critical that you have a fully engaged team and that you are trusting in your technical experts, you're trusting in your communication experts, and you don't try to do everything yourself. And I have been so incredibly impressed with this team and the way that they pulled together to make sure that we were meeting the mission needs. I think another really critical piece of that is we are very mission focused, all of us. That's not just me. That's not just my, my background. I feel like my entire team comes in because they want to support the DHS mission. I mean, frankly, you can be an IT professional in a lot of different environments. This team chooses to serve at the Department of Homeland Security. So I think the fact that they've chosen to be part of serving this mission set sort of says something about who they're going to be in response to a crisis situation, right? And I think the other piece of it is we respond to events all the time, whether we hearken back to the days of Hurricane Katrina, and Sandy up in New York, to any day of the week there is something going on. And so I think we have a group of employees at DHS that just they're very flexible in their approach. They trust one another and they count on the experts to take care of their part of the response, right, rather than trying to be single threaded. And I think those are some of the things that really led to our success. This was a team effort. This was not individual. And I want to reward that team effort every chance that I get.
That's amazing. We do too. But every team has to have a good leader. Otherwise, you've just got a bunch of people going all over the place. So I am not going to let you off the hook for being one of the tremendous leaders at the department. But nice try. So what were some of what you'd consider the biggest challenges? Like, was there one thing that was just something that came up over and over again, or what would you say the biggest challenges were for making the transition quickly?
So, as is the case in most things, it was ensuring that our people were taken care of. Whether it's the frontline officers who had to be out on the ground and making sure their physical safety was managed, even internally in OCIO, our employees are dealing with things at home, right? Homeschooling children and caring for parents and all of those personal constraints that potentially could weigh heavily on the employees while they're trying to continue to work and serve the DHS mission. So one of the things, it was kind of interesting before COVID hit, it's just sort of something I do. I like brown bag lunches, which is exactly what it sounds like. Once a month, sit in a room and we talk to one another. And so that's something I've been doing for years. So when COVID hit, I went to a virtual brown bag lunch session. And initially, all of the questions, all of the discussion was around COVID and telework. When were we coming back to the office? What safety measures were in place? What flexibilities were in place for childcare? And I have to give a huge shout out to our Chico office. Angie Bailey is just amazing and did a great job of keeping the workforce supported and informed. But that was a huge piece of this. And it was something that I don't know that I necessarily thought a lot about. Obviously, caring for your employees is job one as a leader. But this brown bag thing, we did the first one and then said, hey, would you like me to do this more often? Well, it turns out everybody wanted it once a week. And so now, since COVID started, I've been doing a brown bag session once a week. And it has proved invaluable in staying connected with the employees. It started out as a lot of COVID information sharing, and now we're back into a tempo of just a brown bag session where we talk to one another and we connect and we communicate. And I think you can relate this environment, this year long now of not being in the office, has really stressed, I think, our ad hoc relationship, right? No running into folks in the coffee room, no having lunch together occasionally. And so that brown bag session, I think, is really offered for the employees and for me an opportunity to connect in a meaningful way that isn't work related necessarily. So I think what's been really important is the challenge of making sure that your workforce is cared for.
That's a great idea, and it helps psychologically as well as professionally. So that was a great thing to start and keep going. I know that the CPO office also was doing weekly meetings, even with stakeholders. So another shout out to just the level of communication that came out of the department so that everything could keep working, because everyone had so many questions. And you're right, everything was all about COVID. And then in a few weeks, we're all like, okay, COVID, we get it. Let's move on. Like, what's happening and what's coming. So that communication just helped tremendously to keep us going. So excellent. Yeah, you all did, you did an amazing job. So I think that's one of the bright spots. I did want to ask about what were the bright spots of 2020, because, I'm a positive, bubbly person, and there have to have been some good things. So the brown bag sounds like one, but were there any other bright spots in 2020 that came of kind of the pandemic and all of the things that we can obviously identify as not fun and not good?
So we talk a lot about the pandemic, right? We talk a lot about the pandemic response. But one of the things that I am incredibly proud of is the fact that all of the other work we said we were going to get done this year before we knew we were going to get slammed with a COVID, we are on track to accomplish, and did accomplish everything we set out to last year. So when I look at this workforce and this team that I get to engage with on a daily basis, they're knocking it out of the park, and they're doing it in spite of all of these constraints that have been put in place by our telework posture and COVID and not being able to travel and all of those things. And yet we're still on track to get done all of the big, huge objectives that we set for ourselves. And I just think that, again, speaks volumes to the tremendous professionals that work at the Department of Homeland Security. And I know I might sound a little cheerleading-ish myself here, but it really is a privilege to work with these folks. Their dedication is just, it's something else.
That is okay to be a cheerleader. I consider myself a cheerleader. I was a cheerleader in high school. It's perfectly fine, because you are right. You have from working with all of DHS for the last, gosh, I hate to say it's almost 20 years, but it's been a long time working with the department, and you meet one exceptional person after another. And it is because they are so committed to the mission. They are dedicated, and frankly, they're resilient, amazing Americans. And so they are truly a bright spot. So that's a great one. I'm so glad you said that, because they deserve so much more praise than they ever get. It's always when something goes wrong that we hear about, DHS, and look at what happened here, or look at what happened there. And nobody thinks about that. Oh, well, on that day, 239,000 employees were doing other things that went really well. So I'm glad that HS Today could help get that message out and present that perspective. So I think to just wrap up, I'm going to have to ask you what you think the new normal is going to look like.
Wow, I've been asked that question a number of times, and I think for me, I heard the phrase maximum flexibility, right? And those, years ago, I used to use the phrase semper gumby, right? Always flexible. And I just feel like that's where we're at. It is maximum flexibility, and being okay with adjusting, right? And what I mean by that is, a lot of us, I think, have had to take a good hard look at what works for us personally in terms of our professional connections, in this virtual environment, and how we ensure that things that maybe just happened organically, that we make time and effort to make them happen with intent. And I think communication is one of those, and connection with our employees and with our colleagues is a huge aspect of that. So when I think about what we're going to do going forward, I firmly believe we're going to have to continue the emphasis on communication and connection. Those are the things that will drive our success. Again, I'm going to say it, none of us does this alone. We do this as a team. And the only way those teams are successful is if they feel connected, and committed to one another. And in the current environment, we just have to find ways to make that work continuously.
That's excellent. So adaptability. Yeah, adaptability and flexibility. That's terrific. Well, I mean, they're lucky they're in your hands. So we want to just congratulate you again for being nominated and being awarded one of our mission awards for your tremendous work helping the country get through COVID. So I know that has not ended, that it's still happening every single day. And as I said, you had the presidential transition to manage and make sure that operations at DHS continue regardless of what's going on in the outside world. So you are a jewel. You are a treasure. You need to know that. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the American people, because you kept that department going at a tremendously difficult time when there was so much angst and so much stress among your employees and among Americans in general. And all of us are people. We're Americans, we're DHS employees, we're whatever we are in the world. And COVID really impacted everyone on every level. So thank you for being a bright spot in that. Thank you for your commitment to communicating and helping people feel more comfortable as COVID advanced. And thank you for your leadership. You are tremendous. I mean, you have dedicated your life to the country, and I can't think of a person who would deserve the award more. So thank you, Beth. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, you have a wonderful day, and I hope you get a break. I wish I could send you a coffee, but it's against the law. So have a good one. And again, thank you for your time today.
Take care.